Hello.
Today we're going back to our favorite year of human history, 1933. Woo!
I didn't know that
Everything
was on
going
record.
so swell. And how we doing here, boys?
Oh, can't complain.
Yeah, doing
I'm
all right.
I'm reaching out to Groucho in about 2 years, so I'll let you know how that goes.
Very excellent, very excellent. Today we are doing duck soup. What is duck soup? It's a soup that's duck soup, and it's very easy. And that's why it's duck soup.
Yeah.
We'll just go right into it. It's a Marx Brothers production with a bazillion different comedy elements, vaudeville, Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a little over an hour long, and it goes extremely fast.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts.
Yeah. This is the only Marx Brothers movie I think I've seen. Of course, just
Wow.
being a living person, I've seen lots of stuff that references the Marx Brothers. Certainly Groucho Marx is an incredibly iconic figure. I think Harpo and Chico less so, but people I think still know those names. Zeppo, not really. Zeppo, I think it's always a punchline that Zeppo doesn't really do anything. But this is the only film that I've seen from them. Now I've seen it all the way through. Like I mentioned on our last episode a few years ago, I tried to watch it and got a disc that was unwatchable for the last 10 minutes or so. But I do think it's interesting to see a film from a time when a comedy could literally just be jokes back to back to back to back to back. And I think that's kind of how a lot of comedy used to be structured. And nowadays, I think we expect more of a narrative from that kind of thing, even from something as simple as like stand-up comedy. People, I think, expect a much more rigid or a much more narrative structure to that kind of thing. Comedians tell jokes, but they tell them within the context of, here's a story about getting my son ready for school in the morning. Here's a story about dealing with my dog. This is a real throwback, I think, to a time, and I think vaudeville kind of was this, where you could just get up on stage and tell like punchline after punchline with really no relation between them. Do that for like 20 minutes, and that's your set. And I've been exposed to, I think, more of these comedians lately, mainly from watching The Muppet Show, because the first couple of seasons, a lot of their guests are like older vaudeville stars, so people who made their name in vaudeville. People like George Burns, Milton Berle, another name that comes to mind, he wasn't on The Muppet Show, but Rodney Dangerfield, all have this kind of style of getting up on stage and telling joke after joke after joke. And that's how this movie is structured. And I'll admit that it doesn't totally work for me. It's a style of comedy that I like other things that use it. Like when I was a kid, I watched almost nothing but Looney Tunes cartoons, which I think owe a lot to vaudeville. But at least here, and in a lot of other cases, there seems to be an emphasis on quantity over quality, because just the number of jokes is totally secondary to everything else. Delivery, structure, story, characters. A lot of the time, the jokes aren't even delivered like jokes. They're just said, and then another punchline happens immediately afterward. And a lot of the time, that doesn't really work for me, because I wanted more in the delivery of it. That said, there were a few jokes that got enormous laughs out of me, and I don't usually laugh. I was consistently chuckling at this movie, but there were one or two points where I thought they did a great job at setting up a joke and then building upon it in progressively funnier ways. I think the highlight for me was there's the scene where Harpo and Chico are breaking into Groucho's mansion. They're trying to get into the safe, and Harpo has the combination to the safe, and he thinks he's unlocking the safe, but he's actually dialing the radio, and he turns it up incredibly loud, and now he has to get rid of this radio. And even when he's essentially destroyed it and there's nothing left, it's still playing very, very loudly. And I think that's a combination of great slapstick. You cut back to Groucho, and I forget the leading lady's name, but they're reacting upstairs to like, what's all this noise downstairs, and every wrinkle that comes into that gag just makes it funnier. So when those came along, I really enjoyed them, and those few gags were what bumped this up from an appreciative 3 to a 4 for me.
Mm-hmm. I think that radio gag is probably the best point in this film, because it's so timeless in a way that some of the other jokes inevitably aren't, even if nowadays we're not turning up and down the radios in our homes, but we are messing with our televisions and our cell phones and our computers and whatnot. And I still think the like situational secondhand embarrassment type of comedy there is just so strong and timeless. I was a little concerned that I would not like this, especially 2 minutes into it, before Groucho shows up, because it's kind of just Margaret Dumont, who plays Gloria, doing this kind of like floofy thing, which is fine, and it plays off of Groucho really well. But when it was just her, I was kind of like, I really hope the whole movie isn't just like vaguely aristocratic tendencies of communication. But thankfully, once Rufus Firefly is just rattling off all these one-liners, I really bought into it. As far as the laughter goes for me, I didn't have any laugh out loud moments. I don't think I had some like chuckles. My God, chuckles. Chuffles. I kind of like that. We should coin that phrase, chuffles. And there were a couple points where I was watching this in the living room of our house, and my mom was like doing laundry or something, so she was kind of walking to and fro while I was watching. And during the joke where the joke Groucho makes when he says he's going to call his lawyer as soon as he graduates from law school, my mom kind of walked by and was like, "Oh, that's a funny joke." Like, it didn't make her laugh, but she did mean it, and she found it genuinely clever. So it was kind of in this weird space where it wasn't funny enough to elicit like a big exclamation out of either of us, but we did appreciate and enjoy it in that more passive way. So that's kind of where I fell. And I anticipated that this episode would be similar to our Holy Grail, the Monty Python and the Holy Grail episode, especially reprising Zach's comments about how, at least in Zach's review, how everything feels secondary to the comedy. There's not a ton in the way of directorial style or innovation on a cinematic level, but I gave this a 3.5. I enjoyed it. I'm glad it's only 69 minutes long, because I think I would have enjoyed it less if it were longer. And I made the mistake 2 Cookie Pocket episodes in a row of watching a George Miller Wasteland Mad Max movie after watching our Cookie Pocket movie and before we record. So my brain's been washed by the sands of the wasteland. But I'm digging, and I'll try to remember as much as I can.
I was scouring Letterboxd, just trying to find something that Zach maybe had seen once in passing, because you can't find something that Zach hadn't seen, so you have to find something that he's like, oh, I watched this like halfway, and then something
when I was 11 years old.
Yeah. I was but a little boy watching Duck Soup, and
I didn't have the internet yet.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I was a complete shot in the dark. The only one that I know that had seen this was my dad. He thought it was funny as heck, so our comedy's pretty similar. This was the first time in a long time I've laughed out loud this much, and I was very surprised. I was very surprised, and I think I was just surprised by not only like the number of jokes, but how quick the transitions were into completely different scenes that had no continuity, and then having completely different types of comedy in it, and just it's weird to say that it flowed so well when there was nothing really flowing. And I think part of that is because I was interpreting it as a comedy routine rather than actual film. I think if you look at it that way, it makes a whole lot of sense when it comes to the execution, because that kind of got into this, like with recent comedies always have some type of story. It's like the comedy always has to be built around something in order for it to hold any muster. And as we know, like 90% of the time as of 2024, past 5 years doesn't really work. And it works very, very, very occasionally. And it's funny that you mentioned Christian Monty Python, because I was thinking about them pretty much the entire time. And I think Monty Python does have a semblance of a story. I mean, the Holy Grail is literally about the Holy Grail, but I do think that they play with the fact that there's a story happening, and also that it's just a meme, and they kind of go back and forth. They give you whiplash, like pretending like things are real when they're not. This is just like full throttle silliness and getting as many laughs as humanly possible in a short amount of time. And for me, I think it worked a lot better than it probably did for the both of you. And I think it might just come down to personal preference, but I also think just the setups and the production, especially with the war scene, completely out of left field, or I should say completely from the front, and wishing that things came from the left. But but yeah, that whole scene was such a surprise that they just went like crazy with the costumes and everything, like Groucho's changing into a whole bunch of different American like uniforms, like literally every shot, which is hilarious. And there's like an actual battle going on with blanks and real guns and everything, and it's just really funny.
And stock footage.
And stock footage, yeah. A lot of like surprising, like direct poking fun at the Great War, and this was kind of like people were still super cynical. I mean, this film didn't perform very well. It performed better than all the films that were performing terribly because of the Great Depression, but. In terms of criticisms, reading some of them from when it came out, it seemed like it was pretty heavily criticized and in bad taste, which I think it's a good telltale sign when a comedy is revered so many decades, almost a century later, and that really the worst time that it ever had when it came to audience response was when it came out. And I think that is something really fantastic to say about a straight comedy that's like nothing else, that has no other layers to it. It's just for the memes. And I think that is really fantastic. Definitely there's always going to be those bits and pieces that don't hold up very well, which we could probably get into, but I was super surprised at the execution, and I think a lot of the dumb jokes would not any top billed comedian right now that's acting, I should say top billed actor that plays in comedy movies, excuse me, would not be able to execute at that level of prowess when it comes to that much silliness. And part of that's because of the time period, and part of that is just because Groucho is funny as hell. So what else do you guys want to get into? Like, what about the other Marx Brothers?
Well, yeah, I mean, something I did want to touch on really quickly, because you reminded me of it when you mentioned this came out during the Depression, and a lot of movie studios were struggling during the 30s because of the Depression. Universal was basically saved by making their Universal horror films, which they could make on the cheap. Wow. And I do think that the Marx Brothers and other kind of quick comedies kind of saved Paramount. The version of this movie I watched had a title card at the beginning saying that it was produced in coordination with the NRA. Did you guys have that title card?
I don't think so.
What did you watch this on?
I watched this on Vimeo, because there's an upload of this on Vimeo that is the entire film.
What?
I wish I knew that.
I meant to do more research into that, but it slipped my mind. I don't know if there was crazy. Some prominent debate happening with the NRA in 1933 that made them especially prominent at the time, or maybe I just had some kind of like re-release version that they sponsored down the line or something. But that definitely made me pause when I put it on. You mentioned the other Marx Brothers though, Mitchell. Yeah, I do think, I don't personally have this issue, but I do know people who have difficulty getting into the Marx Brothers because they feel that they're, as characters, they're too like cruel or mean-spirited in a way, which I think a good example of that in this film is Harpo and Chico like ruining the lemonade salesman's life. And they kind of fired the first shot in that debate. Like he gets a bit unpleasant later, but he's very much provoked into that. And I can understand that. It doesn't bug me that much. And I do think I think it would stick with me a little bit less though if I didn't find Harpo kind of creepy. And maybe that's just a me thing, but I do think as like a character and his sort of design and the way he enters the very first scene where he's backwards with this weird mask on and then turns around with the huge eyes and an enormous smile, and he has this sinister pair of scissors that he has for the entire movie. I imagine if I had seen this when I was like much younger, when I was maybe 4 or 5, I might have had nightmares about Harpo Marx.
That's hilarious. I don't think I took as nearly as much from even all three of the other brothers combined related back to Groucho. And I know the impetus of this question was to talk about the other three, but I'm gonna slightly veer off course here.
Put in your pitch. Okay. Put in your pitch.
So if you all remember season 1 of Cookie Pocket, we did an episode on a movie that Stanley Kubrick made that I did not praise enough. I had a lot of not so great takes in season 1. I just want to clear the air a little bit here. Many of the things I said, back then. I was. Many of the things have aged like milk. But one of the more iconic, to my detriment, I think, comments that I've made, at least to my co-host here, is when I mentioned that I didn't. Oh, this wasn't even for this one. This was for the final countdown. But same actor.
Yeah.
I mentioned that I didn't like Kirk Douglas's face. It just unnerved me for some reason. I think it's because he was older in Final Countdown than he is in Paths of Glory that it did bug me as much. But I would say Groucho's face has the opposite effect on me. And I don't I don't know what it is. It's more than just I mean, you could say that maybe I like the lines that his character's given or his jokes more than the other Marx Brothers. But I do think there's something inherently inviting about his face and his facial expressions that is just very hard to put into words. But whatever it is, it works.
I would be intrigued to see the Marx Brothers out of costume and makeup. And I'm not sure if they're actually brothers. Maybe that's just something they adopted for the comedy team. I really don't know.
They are.
They are? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, that does make sense to me then, because I do think they're very good at like adopting each other's mannerisms and physicality as well in a way that really works for the movie. Specifically, the Harpo in the mirror sequence, where in that sequence, not just with the mirror, but throughout the entire scene, Harpo, Groucho, and Chico are all in the same makeup and costume, and there are definitely bits of it where I thought, okay, have they subbed in Groucho now to like convince us that they're passing as Groucho, but then Groucho will come out from under the bed or something. So he's in the same shot. They can't be. So yeah, they do, especially Harpo does a really good job at mimicking his facial expressions. And once he's got the ludicrously fake mustache on, it is pretty difficult to tell them apart.
Yeah. And to the point of, not to change subject back again, but the NRA was nonpartisan up to the 70s and was very much involved in the first gun control laws federally. But up to the 30s, they were mostly a gun rights promotional group, and they were just kind of like teaching more about teaching and what to do when you do own a gun type stuff. So I don't know why the NRA would have like lobbied or something for this, but anyway.
I don't know. Maybe it's just because there's guns at the end. Maybe they had people on set like training.
Maybe they had them loaned. They must have had them loaned, maybe, because they're all Springfields, and that was like where the NRA was founded, with Springfields. But anyway, enough about me. Enough about goofy politics. No politics in this room.
Well, before we jump away from the politics in this room, perhaps I would like to interject.
Yes.
I enjoyed this sort of the whole Freedonia, and what's the other place called? Sylvania? Okay. Yeah. I enjoyed that sort of, I don't know, what sort of conflict. There's a phrase for this where it's like a fake thing. It's not like
An
a Cold
allegory?
War, but I don't know. No, not an I can't find it.
War, or
Yeah, sure. That works. That's what I'm going for here. Thanks, Mitchell. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the sort of nonsense. I really like when they're finally going to engage in diplomacy, and then Groucho spirals into imagining the worst possible scenario that would humiliate him, and then in his pride causes that exact scenario to happen, basically, or worse even. I think I enjoyed this a little bit less and found it a little less inventive than it is, simply because I had seen Doctor Strangelove before watching this, and I think there's a lot of shared DNA there in terms of making fun of not just autocrats but leaders in general that let their ego get in the way of big moments, and particularly diplomacy. So before we exit the political point, I just wanted to get that in there.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Zach.
I was gonna. I'm surprised. See, I thought, Christian, that your go-to comparison with this film was not going to be Monty Python, and that your praise was not necessarily going to be upon these political points, because something that this really reminded me of was The Great Dictator, which you were rather memorably not fond of. So I'm interested to hear your perspective went in a different direction there.
I think I was mixed on The Great Dictator, and I would also put that in the category of I've reformed. I'm a better man. I'm a better cinephile.
Well, this is it combines elements of both The Great Dictator and Monty Python, for sure.
Yeah.
I think, in my opinion, I don't think it is mistaken for attacking politics. And I mean, like I said, it's retroactive. Like, I can see at the time why that would have been a problem. And, you know, it wasn't really a period of satire or when people were taking things not seriously. But I definitely in retrospect, it's parts of it age, like once you get down to like the little subtleties when it comes to criticizing the Great War, and then like the big, like we're sitting in here while you're getting bombed out there and you're a fool, or whatever, however the quote goes, to Pinky, which was great. Very, very clearly Great War centric stuff. And in our opinion, like at this point, obviously, like baseline subtle anti-war things. Like it's really, it's not a major point in the film. It's not a big point at all, really. It definitely serves the comedy, and I think that really works. I think that really works in this case. Yeah, Pinky was he had to grow on me, you know. The scissor thing, like once you realize who he is, like he's basically Rico from Penguins of Madagascar. They always have like a few things that they do, you know, or I would say like Larry, or Mo. I mean, what do I think? Curly. It's like Curly. This got me thinking about Three Stooges and how kind of not good. Three Stooges has some pretty good episodes, but like, or the film too. I mean, yeah, I'm not an expert on Three Stooges.
They were together so long that like they really yo-yo in terms of quality. Yeah.
Yeah, but going back to like having this be a comedy routine, and Zach made a really good point about the Marx Brothers actually acting like brothers, and they're like super distinct characters, but then all of a sudden like their physicality is exactly the same, or their vocal cadence when they're delivering a joke or an anti-joke is like exactly the same. But Groucho clearly is the freaking winner. Like completely pumps out like puns and non sequitur. Like he's insane. And I have to go back to what Christian was saying about his face. Like it's a part of being a good comedian. Some of the best ones they've ever had have like iconic faces, or they have certain faces they have when they've delivered a joke, or they're like waiting for something, or like they're like waiting for the air to clear or something. Like Jim Carrey comes to mind, or Rodney Dangerfield we were talking about. He has massive bulging eyes anytime he's like looking surprised. In the latter half of every joke, he always has his eyes bulging out. Yeah, I think it's all the great marks, all the marks of a great comedian, and definitely more for the times. I can acknowledge that. but I still think the amount of value that you can get out of this now, considering how old it is like not even comparable. I really can't think of very many things from this time period. Not that I'm an expert or anything, but I'm completely like, it's just sad that comedies suck now. Really, it's really what I'm getting down to. Yeah. What else do you got?
I was thinking about the time period and trying to think of like analogous comedies that have similarly impressed me. And the first one that I thought of was Bringing Up Baby, which is a Howard Hawks movie with Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, which I find uproaringly hilarious. But that didn't come for another 5 years even. So I think in terms of like the early 30s, I don't know. I guess Buster Keaton was kind of around before then. Yeah. And I assume Chaplin was too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I guess you have those. But in terms of like the verbal delivery, I feel like it was definitely ahead of the trend. And like what you said about it not doing well because of the Depression, I think just generally this is the perfect example of trying to make art for the second life, not necessarily for how it's received on its first release, but in the long term, that type of success is just so much more meaningful. And I think mirrors, unless you're making something that's very obviously temporal and for its time, I think that more directly mirrors your level of success in making what it is you wanted to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the early 30s are a really interesting time for movie comedy because we're kind of at like a crossroads of types of comedy, because during the 1910s and 1920s, the dominant form of cinematic comedy was slapstick, because you could do that without dialogue. Mm-hmm. And vaudeville, which was much more dialogue based, guy gets up to the mic with a cigar and funny thing happened on the way to the theater here today. That was confined to the stage because you could have a voice on the stage, and there was some slapstick in that as well. And then those two kind of merged in the mid 30s and sort of became screwball comedy, which gave rise to like Bringing Up Baby and It Happened One Night, and kind of the first wave of big, really popular cinematic comedies that weren't slapstick. We were commenting on all of the Marx Brothers, and I will say, Mitchell, you mentioned they're all kind of equally talented. I'm intrigued by Zeppo. I want to know more about Zeppo and why he was like. This is gonna sound bad because they're brothers, so I don't know. Maybe he's just the tag along, but he really doesn't feel utilized here. He doesn't really make jokes. He's, I think, the least memorable of them, even though he has star billing. Like at the beginning, there's this graphic where they all show up as ducks, and he's there and he's on the poster. But I don't know, the way that he's implemented here, it almost feels like he should be like the Jason Bateman of this dynamic, where he's like the straight man who is sick of the other brothers' guff. But I don't really think that was an archetype that had really evolved in movie comedies by this point. So yeah, his portion of the film, he doesn't really feel like he's used all that much or used as he could be in the film.
Mm-hmm. It serves as a good control, like having like Pinky be the absolute ridiculous not talking, and then having the leader and having like just having that straight, literally character to throw fruit at is, I think is a device. It's a device.
Yeah. Maybe if he was the only normal one.
That's true. He does blend in a little bit.
There's so many other normal guys for them to mess with. Maybe he feels a little more diluted, and there are bits of it where it feels like he's meant to be one of the team. Like he's in the big Hail Freedonia number, playing the banjo and walking on his knees with everybody else. But there is kind of an element of like, I think of that meme with Drake, like, who invited blood? He thinks he's on the team. That is the whitest delivery you've ever heard of that joke.
If we did merchandise as a podcast, I think we would need a shirt that says, "I am intrigued by Zeppo" on it. It's just too good. A cursory look at his like letterbox profile says he appeared in the first 5 Marx Brothers films, but then left to start his second career as a theatrical agent. So maybe he and the brothers agreed with you, Zach.
Maybe he was just like their agent then. He was the brother who dealt with all the paperwork, and they made him part of the act. I don't know. Yeah.
What was the actress's name?
Margaret Dumont.
Margaret Dumont?
Yeah.
Margaret Dumont. She played her role well. She played her role well.
Yeah, I knew her name. Like that's a name I know is like a Hollywood star. But looking through her filmography, maybe I know her name from her association with the Marx Brothers, because it sounds like she was in a lot of their movies as like maybe the role that we're saying Zeppo should have played, where she kind of plays the straight woman to their antics.
What do we think about the? Go ahead.
No, sorry. It's also like, I think it's different than just being a straight woman, because her fussiness is almost like, I don't know. It's almost like a Mrs. Bennet type thing, like a Pride and Prejudice, where I don't know. I already said floofiness, so I'm kind of repeating myself here. But I do think that the huff and puff is a big part of it.
Yeah.
And being a pretty good singer, I think.
Yeah. I do think early sound recording isn't quite up to what they're trying to get out of it in this. Yeah. Like the musical numbers sound pretty rough with everybody singing in falsetto.
Yeah.
It works for the radio joke, but not as much for like the repeated fanfare, I think.
I was going to literally talk about what do we think about the fanfare scenes, because they're pretty. It was a full musical number at the beginning and just before the war at the end. So
yeah,
I don't think we're doing it. We're doing what we predicted. Lots of talking over each other.
Everything's off the rails.
I don't really think they needed any of the numbers beyond the Hail Freedonia intro to the war. Everything else felt pretty half-hearted. And that number actually has like gags built into it, where the Marx Brothers are singing the song with banjos or walking along on their knees, whereas the others kind of just feel like songs for song's sake.
Yeah, I was gonna say that they were nicely choreographed.
Christian is putting his head directly behind the microphone, so it looks like his microphone has hair.
I'm being silly.
Yeah. This film causes you to be silly.
Yeah, it's one of these episodes.
Think silly thoughts. Well, that's pretty much all I had. I think we covered everything. Any final
I was going to
thoughts?
mention something else, but it's drifted away from me. Maybe I'll remember it by the very end of the episode.
Yeah. Double shoot. I think Mitchell's frozen again, but I'm going to keep talking. I was watching. I'm calling this my illusion episode because I'm making so many illusions. Oh, Mitchell's back. Oh, no, he's gone again.
Your illusion episode, Christian.
Yes, my illusion episode. I don't watch Hot Ones. I know it's like a phenomenon, but I watched
that everyone watches Hot Ones.
I watched my first Hot Ones. I watched the Conan O'Brien Hot Ones. Which what a way to start. It's full of craziness that only Conan can muster. But towards the end, he's asked a really good interview question by the dude that does Hot Ones, because he's like known for having great questions. But I think it was like advice for comedians or for people wanting to get into show business. And Conan had this great answer, which was study as many forms of comedy as you can. Don't just focus on the new stuff or what's cutting edge or trying to emulate someone that's, I don't know, like who would even be like the hot comedian right now? I guess like a John Mulaney, maybe. I don't even know.
Bill Burr, that kind of.
Yeah. But he was like, one of the things he said was, what's funnier than Don Quixote? Nothing. And it's like, he's like, read the classics, do this, do that. And I think the Marx Brothers and Duck Soup is like a perfect example of exactly what he is talking about. Even if like myself and Zach didn't get as much enjoyment out of it as Mitchell did, I would still say it's like absolutely worth a watch. I'm not going to do a deep dive on the Marx Brothers the same way I would for like a Buster Keaton, because I'm more personally interested in him, but I think I'll probably try A Night at the Opera, and I'm glad I watched this and I liked it. So,
yeah, I'd say it's a classic for a reason. People remember the name for a reason. I think this, Night at the Opera, and Animal Crackers are kind of the three big ones for the Marx Brothers. And at least this one is worth checking out. Watch it with your kids. I think this is comedy the kids will probably like. You'll have to explain one joke to them, but mostly it's pretty kid friendly. I was gonna say, I remembered my thought. I do think it's very funny that Margaret Dumont wants Rufus Firefly to be the new ruler of Freedonia because she doesn't like the way the current government is running things and the new policies they want to enact. And Firefly immediately basically just does exactly the same thing. And I do think that the movie, I wish the movie made a little bit more of that than it does, because I think that is a funny dynamic.
Yeah. Especially like knowing 100 years of history afterwards. Yeah, it's really fun. I'm totally at a loss of like other movies to compare to it other than ones we've already talked about, but highly recommend. It's super short, and yeah, bring the kids and Nanny.
Yeah, Nana can watch. Nana probably saw this movie when she was a kid.
Well, hopefully she knows what's going on.
Yeah,
at this rate. But week in review.
Yeah.
Ooh, week in review. I've teased our audience twice now with having watched the more recent Mad Max films, but again, I'm going to shirk that. I wrote reviews on them, and they're good. I don't think I have many original things to say about either of them. But recently, I watched on Disney Plus the new Jim Henson documentary. I think it's titled Jim Henson Idea Man, and it's directed by Ron Howard. It's one of those things where you watch through it and it's kind of generic, and you think the director is going to be someone you never heard of. And then it's like, oh, I guess Ron Howard did that. Oh, okay. And, I like Ron Howard fine, I guess. But he did a documentary on the Beatles a few years ago that was meant to sort of profile their touring years before the Beatles retired from touring. And I was kind of excited because though I'm a rather well-read Beatles fan, I think most of the nuggets I've picked up over time are about their innovations in the studio and other things than their touring. But when I watched that documentary, I found it was basically a surface level documentary about the Beatles and not even really a documentary specified too much to the touring. And similarly, this documentary is very surface level about Jim Henson, which is fine. And it's like an hour 45-ish. So it's a decent runtime. But since they talk about basically everything he did from Sesame Street to the creation of the Muppets to the development and selling of the Muppet Show to The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, there's like no time to get in depth into any of it, especially when they're also talking about his like marriage and family problems and things. But I still think I still landed on a 3 out of 5 for this, which is a like and like a good rating for me, because I think it does a really good job of, I think, appropriately situating Jim Henson alongside like the Walt Disney types in the sense of people that revolutionized entertainment and really promoted a form and elevated a form in a way that other people didn't really respect. So if you're a Henson fan, I'm sure you've probably already seen this. But since coming off of our Muppet movie episode, I wanted to pop that in there. And also, interestingly, in the doc, they said the director of the Muppet movie wasn't really sold on the Muppets and like didn't really get it, which I thought was interesting. And in that swamp scene in the Muppet movie, Henson was literally like in the steel tube thing, like underwater, which is just crazy to me. Like, oh my gosh. But he really would do anything for his art, and that's admirable, I think.
Yeah, I think he's in a diving bell under the log with like a CRT television so he can see what's happening through the cameras. Yeah. That's a great setup. I guess I'll talk about All the Money in the World, which is a movie I had been looking forward to for a very long time. For a few years, Ridley Scott has been one of my directors who I'm trying to work my way through his entire filmography and figure out which I prefer. On my Letterboxd, I do kind of ranked lists of directors once I've seen all of their work. And All the Money in the World was one I was looking forward to because I remember this film coming out. It was in 2017, and I didn't even know what it was about at the time. I think a lot of people didn't really know what it was about, but they did know that it was the movie that Kevin Spacey was removed from in post and replaced with Christopher Plummer in 9 days, which is
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's an insane factoid. But other than that, I didn't really know anything about the movie until I think maybe last year. I was just doing some research on it, trying to find out where can I watch this movie. And I learned that it's about the kidnapping of John Paul Getty III, which is a situation that I have kind of like a personal fascination with. I don't know why. It just sort of interests me. This because in the 70s when it happened, J. Paul Getty Sr. was the richest man in the world. He had the biggest fortune that anybody in history had ever amassed up to that point. His grandson was kidnapped by the mafia, and he refused to pay the ransom.
Oh my God!
And that's an immediately hooking idea, and I think it's a great opportunity to do this study of a man who, despite having all this money, never really felt secure in that fortune. And I think it's a great opportunity to do this deep dive on maybe kind of the folly of this idea of financial security and getting more and more and more. And one of the best lines, I think, in the entire movie, which I included in my review, there's a scene where somebody's confronting Getty, played by Christopher Plummer, and he said he's had a great day on the market. His stocks have done terrifically. His grandson is kidnapped and there's a ransom out and he's still refusing to pay it. And this guy, played by Mark Wahlberg, says, all right, are you going to pay it? He says, no, I am still really financially insecure right now. Well, what would it take for you to feel secure? And he thinks for a second and just says, more. And I think that's everything around Getty in the movie is really well done. Where the movie fails, I think, is making Mark Wahlberg the lead. Because he really doesn't feel, I don't want to say necessary, because that character needs to be there to establish this element of the hostage negotiations, because he's this guy that Getty brings onto the case to negotiate with the hostage takers and try and get his grandson back. And everybody talks about this character like he's James Bond, like he has all this expertise. He does this for a living, but he never really does anything all that remarkable other than get hung up on the phone. And so it really just feels like he's there because some executive said, we need like a leading man. We need a handsome hunk to put on the poster. Get me Mark Wahlberg. By the end, they're talking about him like you helped so much, but I'm thinking, did he really? So yeah, it's a shame. I was really anticipating it, and I enjoyed bits of it a lot, which is what gave it a 3 out of 5 for me. It looks great. It really is amazing, I think, that they were able to make this into something in a little over a week, given the disaster that they encountered in the late stages of post-production. But I don't think it's all that I necessarily wanted it to be for the years I've been waiting to track it down.
Nice review.
Thank you.
That was good. Yeah. 9 days, huh?
Yes.
9 days, huh? How's he going to lead it in today? 9 days is nothing like 20 years, which is how long we were in Afghanistan. And during that time, Rocket Raccoon was a Navy SEAL.
Oh, okay. I got it.
Oh, okay.
With 160 confirmed kills. Now, okay,
where the hell is it going?
I've talked to a number of Green Berets. They've all told me that Navy SEALs are liars and a-holes. And it's possible. Let's just say it's possible that Chris Kyle is one of those people. And various people that have been friends with him or knew him or even worked with him out in the field have agreed that he was an a-hole and he lied a lot. However, this does not mean that Clint Eastwood didn't make a banger of a movie, American Sniper, in 2014. And I'm definitely glad for seeing this now than when I did. Because, first of all, it's not an anti-war movie at all, of course. I think Bradley Cooper really literally carries home the fact that there's and like being on back and forth on deployments is a lot different than going to a theater of war for a long time and then returning home after years. kind of going back and forth and literally not being able to start a life is something that's not really addressed in media that much. And I thought that was a really great take on what like a modern veteran's life might be, even though it's like a little campy here and there, and the dialogue isn't like anything to write home about, but I still think that aspect of the film is great. I also think the action scenes are pretty great. We were talking about rules of engagement, and this is an excellent example of the concerns that many had at the time and still do. And in general, as far as I know, not having read the books or anything that are about Chris Kyle, I think it does a pretty good job of assessing what happened versus what didn't, and still keeping that one shot and done. Clint Eastwood doesn't care, like, oh, it's shot, all right, we're done, kind of directing style. When it comes to just like action scenes are action scenes, they are what they are, and exaggeration here and there, but I just think it's very well paced out film. It's a very well structured film, and I think that was something that was really hard to accomplish. And yeah, I still was so compelled. Like, I really wanted to give it 3.5, but just how well structured it is and how effective it is when he's kind of like literally getting completely pelted by multiple like 10 plus people at once while he's on a roof, and then there's like a dust storm that's horrible CGI, but like the dust storm is coming in and like everybody's freaking out, and he's like, and he has to go all the way down, and he's getting shot at, and there's a sniper that's based on a real sniper that's like coming back and forth that has like a vendetta with him, and he's like limping trying to get in a truck and everything, and it's just. And then all of a sudden he's home again. And then his wife's asking him like, why don't you come outside and play with the kid and stuff? And then he like sees the dog, and then the dog is like trying to eat the kid. And he's like freaking, he drops his beer. He's like about to freaking murder the dog in front of everybody. It was just really like, it was really excellent. I don't want to say excellent portrayal of PTSD, but a very realistic and believable portrayal of an actual disorder. And I thought, honestly, that's one of the best parts of the film for me. It's not about like the sad bugling at the end and wow, look at all the Navy SEALs that loved Chris Kyle and everything. And I think that error is gonna weigh on people. Like, I think that's gonna be bothersome in the next 10 years. I don't think the film's gonna age very well. I think it already hasn't aged very well. But we don't talk about war films that come out just after 9/11 or within the like next 15 years of 9/11 because they have their own kind of air to them as well. But yeah, it's a 4 out of 5. Definitely one of Bradley Cooper's. I think it's his best. I don't want to compare him to Guardians. I'm sorry, but like. I think it's his best like in-person performance. He is a fantastic voice actor for sure, but I watched A Star Is Born, and it's not there for me. I'm sorry.
Oh my god!
Compared to American Sniper, it's very hard. Maybe I'm a little bit biased, but
no, he's great, and
he's
American
great
Sniper is different. Yeah,
it's different. He's versatile.
But that was my first movie in the theater, or my first R-rated movie in the theater.
Oh, okay, all right.
Wow.
First movie.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I went to school with a lot of military kids. So American Sniper was the talk of the playground when I was in like 5th or 6th grade. But I still have not yet seen it. But it's on my Clint Eastwood list because he's one of my other 2C directors. But I'll have to get around to it at the library at some point.
Yeah. That's
great.
I better start running to the library now.
Better start running. I'm coming after you.
Yes.
Fetch my Stradivarius.
Alrighty.
Let's see. Yeah, Mitchell's starting this one.
Okay.
Yeah, let's just jump in. You don't get an intro this time, audience. Yeah. You have to guess what's about to happen.
Figure it out.
In 3, 2, 1, go.
Duck soup.
4 out of 5.
Taking a card.
4 out of 5.
Fanfare.
3 out of 5.
Following in the footsteps of her husband.
2 out of 5.
The Honorable Pantu of Miftan.
3 out of 5.
Going to the House of Representatives with your trousers up.
4 out of 5.
Freedonia National Anthem.
3 out of 5.
A good quarter cigar.
4 out of 5.
Ciccolini and Pinky.
3 out of 5.
A big black mustache.
4 out of 5.
A big black cigar.
3 out of 5.
A big pain in the neck.
3 out of 5.
That's a no good.
4 out of 5.
A Rufus over your head.
4 out of 5.
Cleaning the crackers out of the bed.
4 out of 5.
You swine.
4 out of 5.
You worm.
3 out of 5.
You upstart.
4 out of 5.
Seeing your lawyer after he graduates from law school.
4 out of 5.
I object.
4 out of 5.
Hindquarters.
3 out of 5.
Wanting to get rid of habeas corpus, but getting rid of you instead.
3 out of 5.
1 second.
Elephant eliminate.
4 out of 5.
Time.
Oh.
Nice. You will know exactly, the last few, you will know exactly where they're from when we do our finale. For sure.
Yeah.
What are we previewing next?
I think that's me. And
It's
next
you.
up, okay, so at the end of our last season, when I was previewing what we were going to talk about this season in my episodes, I said that we might have the Beatles on, but not quite as you might expect them. And
Paul McCartney
when I said
is
that,
joining this podcast.
It's the best guest
Yeah,
ever.
I got on the phone with Ringo, and he's bringing along Paul, and the ghost of George might make an appearance as well.
And Peter Jackson.
But-
Lennon.
When I said that, I was referring to the film we'll be talking about on our next episode, which is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. By all accounts, very ill-advised attempt to make a big studio musical out of the Beatles album of the same name, starring Peter Frampton, the Bee Gees, and a whole host of other people who you'll probably go, oh, they act? No, they don't. I haven't seen it myself, but I'm told we're going to be in for a rollicking bad time. So join us next time for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Can't wait.
Very nice. Very eloquent. With that, see you on the battlefield, soldier.
Sayonara, sucker!